Hey, it's Ollie, and in this video I want to tackle one of the more kind of difficult, controversial topics of language learning, which is that of fluency. When can you consider yourself fluent in a language, and what does it mean to be fluent? I've always found in my languages that you start off and you begin learning, and sort of in the back of your mind whilst you're learning a language is this question of when am I going to be fluent? And you ask yourself this question, especially in your first couple of languages where the path and the journey of learning a language isn't all that familiar to you. But I always find that as long as you're asking that question, it never gets there. You never get to a point where you're kind of asking yourself, like, okay, when am I going to be fluent? And then that day arrives. The day never comes. And I've always found that the day that you realise you're fluent kind of comes out of the blue a long time later, often a few years later, when you look back and you realise to yourself, actually, I was living my life in that language. I had friends, and I had that language was as much a meaningful part of my life as my mother tongue was. And so I always find that these kind of understandings of fluency come retrospectively. So then what does it actually mean to be fluent, and how can we define it? Well, on the one hand, you have this school of thought that says, well, unless you are able to speak exactly like a native speaker, say the same things a native speaker would in exactly the same way with the same degree of accuracy, then you can't really call yourself fluent. But there's a whole host of reasons why this is a very problematic definition of fluency, not least of which is that however good you may be in the language and however much you might have studied it, there's one very important thing you're missing, which native speakers have, that you will never have, which is your lived experience in the language. If you think about a lot of what binds you together with your close friends, for example, it's shared jokes are things like things from your childhood. Might be cartoons you used to watch, funny ads on TV and things like that. And as a language learner, you can never have that same level of experience in the language. You haven't lived through the same things. And so on a very kind of deep fundamental level, you're never going to be able to get to that true native level, because it's not just about language, it's about your cultural understanding and your own personal history and things like that. And so because of that, we have to then look at fluency from a different standpoint and say, okay, well, how are we going to define it? What exactly is it? And it has to be a linguistic thing. It has to be something that we have to be able to relate it to what you actually use the language for in your daily life. And so this is how I start to think about fluency. I'm back here in Japan right now. I'm back for the first time in about 6 years. And since I've been here, I've been kind of observing what my Japanese is like now compared to what it was before. And obviously in many ways it's not as good. I've forgotten a lot of vocabulary. Stuff isn't on the tip of my tongue as much as it used to be. And so when people ask me, like, are you fluent in Japanese? It's very difficult to say, because I certainly, when I lived here before, certainly would have considered myself fluent. And now I'm kind of conscious that it's not as good as it was. But then that's not to say that I couldn't get it back up to a good level or better very quickly with some focused work. And so I'm kind of reluctant to say that I'm not fluent in the language, because it's just such a moving target. And of course, the more work you do on other languages that you may speak, the more that your other languages kind of fluctuate as well. So it's extremely difficult to pin it down into something that you can just say, yes, I'm fluent, or I'm not. So then what is it? Well, in all the languages that I've learned, I could easily imagine situations that I could put myself in which I would sink rather than swim. So in the case of Japanese, for example, if you put me in a university and said, okay, now lecture in a university on such and such a topic, I would sink, because I don't have the vocabulary, I don't have the range of expression, I don't have familiarity with that kind of area of discourse. I quite simply couldn't do it. So just like that, it's very easy to imagine lots of situations in which I could knock myself down and say, well, okay, I can't do that. And then, so you end up saying to yourself, well, okay, I'm not fluent. But then that doesn't take away from the fact that last night I went out to an izakaya, like a Japanese pub, and I was chatting to the people there, and was ordering food and drink, and had a great night, all in Japanese. And just like that, I'm traveling here for a few weeks, and I'm going to have lots and lots of great discussions and conversations with people for the whole time that I'm here in Japanese, and it's perfectly fine. Like I'm gonna make mistakes and stuff, but for the purposes that I need it for, which is basically to facilitate me traveling in Japan and communicating with the people that I meet. It's absolutely fine. My Japanese is at a level where it's at the level that I need it to be, and yeah, it could be better, but so what? And so this brings me to how I think about fluency. And if we're going to hold fluency to an extremely high standard, where it has to be, it's at a very kind of perfectionist level, then I think, okay, well, that's fine. You're welcome to that view, but then I think we need a different word to define what I consider to be like the goal of learning languages. And so we could call it conversational fluency. And I think conversational fluency is quite a helpful term. And it certainly describes how I think about my languages and what I need them for, which is this. For me, conversational fluency is the ability to have an enjoyable conversation with a native speaker of the language in such a way that it's enjoyable for both people and neither of you is placed under undue stress or strain in the conversation. So basically, you can enjoy chatting and it's not too hard for either of you. Before you get to that point, conversations are often a bit difficult. Like the other person might struggle to understand you. You might not quite understand very easily what they're saying. That's what I mean by stress or strain. And it's the point where that stress or strain disappears and you can just have that enjoyable conversation where you're both following along and enjoying and understanding. That I think you can say that you've reached a level of conversational fluency, because that is the point where the language really can become part of your life and it enriches your life in every way. And so that's how I personally define fluency for me. So how about for you? Do you feel that you're fluent in your language? If so, why? Let me know in the comments below and I'll see what you have to say.